Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Great. Martin, as I told you before we got started, last week I was looking at some of your content online, mainly on LinkedIn, just in preparation for this chat. And I really don't know where to start because you've got so much stuff, so many interesting ideas and insights that you share with your audience. So thank you for accepting our invite. I'm really looking forward. Now, today, we are going to talk about selling and ethical selling in particular. But before we do that, I'm really interested. I saw on your profile, Martin, that you are an ex-monk. Is that correct?
That is right, yes.
That's amazing. I'm just interested. Can you tell me a little bit more about that part of your life? And actually also, in addition to that, Martin, I'm just curious, has that helped you in any way also from a professional perspective?
Yeah, a lot. So the backstory is that as long as I can remember, I've always had this strong fascination with people and psychology and why people do things the way they do things or not do things. Also about myself, like, why don't I change this, right? What is it about human nature that makes us want something and then not do it? And so I was always really curious. I have never been religious. I was an agnostic, and I still am. But when I met, I was 19, 20 years old, I met people who meditated, and I started meditating, and that turned out to be really beneficial. And it also brought me very fast insight into myself and into other people. So this kind of hooked me. It was like, I want more of this. Can I meditate again tomorrow with you guys? And then that became an everyday thing. And then I ended up basically living in, and at some point I really moved in. And then a number of years later, I took the vows and I became an official monk. And yeah, that has had a profound impact on my life because it helped me see that as a human being, you're not as important as you think you are. That's a really nice change in perspective. And it helped me to pay a lot more attention to the signals that people give. Whereas I used to, they're doing this or saying that, and that means so-and-so. This 12 years in the monastery enabled me to dive deeper, to explore more about what is real for somebody and why people do the things they do. And so this whole paying attention aspect of it really helped me over the course of the years, but also in my business, because it enabled me to become much more efficient and effective at not just the coaching work that I do, not just the selling that I do when I'm talking to a buyer, but also the coaching itself. So yeah, the impact has been life-changing, and I can't recommend life in a monastery to everybody because it's pretty intense. It's not all peace and beautiful the way people think. But meditation is something that I think anybody would benefit from.
Yeah. And I can see how strong the impact can be, especially when you say that one of the things that experience taught you is how do you read people's signals. And I can see how powerful it can be also when you have a sales conversation, for example.
Oh yeah.
And we're going to talk about that today. Now, you are an authority when it comes to ethical selling. What do you mean? What are we talking about, Martin? What is ethical selling? Why do you like to call it this way?
Because I call it this way because ethics are fundamental to a healthy relationship and healthy society. When people operate in ways that are not ethical, things go to pieces and people get hurt and people get conned and cheated, and that is just not a way that anybody would like to be treated. And as a business owner, we don't want to be treating anybody else that way either. And ethics has become a bit of a forgotten word. Like in the last century, it was much more a thing that philosophers and authors and politicians would talk about. And these days, it's something that companies stick on a brand in order to greenwash what they're doing. It's not a thing in society the way it used to be, to operate with decency and integrity and ethics. And I take a stand for that. I think that everybody should have integrity and ethics as the fundamental mode of operating. And when it comes to selling, that makes all the difference, right? Because there's a term I use called the good egg problem, where the higher somebody is on the scale of integrity, the more difficult it becomes for them to sell their work. I see this a lot in social entrepreneurs, for purpose businesses. We want to help. We want to do something good. Just, I don't want to have to sell my stuff. Now, sorry, somebody at the door.
No worries. It's informal. Let's see. If you need to go, just
no,
go
I think
and then I'll
right.
cut it.
It's the mailman. He'll ring the upstairs bell. Good egg problem. Isn't it painful to see somebody whose business exists to make an impact, to make a difference, and they don't manage to sell as much of their work as they would like to, simply because they don't want to treat anybody badly, they don't want to force anyone, they don't want to be pushy, they don't want to be spammy or sleazy, and so they hold back from enrolling people? Or do they hold back from having the conversations that make people want to enroll themselves? Right? That is what ethical selling is about for me.
Yeah.
It's about showing up to an interaction where you are there to serve somebody in making a decision. Whether that is a yes or a no, that's not your business. Your business is to help the other person make the best decision for them at this moment, even if that would be a no.
Yeah.
And when you show up to the sales process and the sales conversation in this way, it takes the awkwardness out of it. Because I'm not here to convince you that you should buy my stuff. I'm here to ask you a couple of questions, learn a bit about you, see what kind of need and urgency there is. And if you want me to explain how it works, then we'll explain how it works.
We'll
and
do
if
that,
you
yeah.
want to get the stuff that I do and that I charge money for, then we can talk about how that works. And so it becomes a very pleasant, friendly, social interaction where you position yourself as an explorer. You want to discover this person, you want to learn this person, you want to learn what it's like to be them. That makes the whole sales process something much more social, humane, and actually fun.
Yeah.
The benefit is that when you do it that way and the buyer does say no, then they'll remember the conversation as something where they felt respected. They'll end the conversation thinking, yeah, I'll talk to you again. This feels good. Yeah. So follow-up becomes a lot more easy and natural, because why would you not want to follow up with somebody with whom you had a wonderful interaction?
Yeah.
So compare that to the typical standard, well, there's the 3-step close and there's the 5-step process to building rapport. And no, it's a human being. You don't need to learn the tricks and the steps. You need to find out what type of presence you need to bring to a conversation that feels in line with your values and your integrity, and that is clearly designed to uncover whether or not somebody wants the thing you do. Yeah. That's ethical selling.
And actually, Martin, you used a key word. Just now you used the word enrolling. And I know that you talk a lot about the difference between selling and enrolling. Could you tell us more about this?
Well, I work with the premise that if they're talking to you, to some degree, they want what you have. Your product, your service, your agency, whatever it is that you sell. They wouldn't be in a conversation with you unless they want the outcome that you work for. When people try to sell, when people work the buying process with the idea of selling, they have this idea that they need to go and convince somebody and persuade and make compelling arguments. And all those things can work, but it's much more effective and much more fun to help somebody develop a vision that is similar to your vision. So you have your vision of their outcome, right? After you buy and I do my work, you're going to get this. It's going to be wonderful. That's the after. They have a vision of that outcome, but it's different than yours. They might want different things. They might have concerns in the mix. They might have objections about cost and time frame and speed of delivery. So they have a different vision. Most selling is based on the idea that if you'll only see what I'm trying to tell you, let me explain. Let me show you what goes in the tin and how it works. So I'm trying to convey a vision to you. That means that what you're seeing is right, and what the buyer's seeing, that's not yet right. That's kind of wrong. So you're actually making the buyer wrong by saying, no, that's not what I mean. Let me show you. The way I teach selling is that when you have a conversation that explores what it's like to be the other person, and you ask the right questions, your vision and their vision gradually start to overlap. You'll end up looking at the same thing. When that happens, the buyer says, oh, so if I pay this much and I do that homework, and then you go to town and you do the thing that you're magic at in this way, then the outcome is going to be that. Yes, that's exactly what I was talking about. Then the buyer says, well, if that's how it works and if that's the price, where do I pay? Where do I sign? How does this work? How do we move forward from here? Yeah. So you get voluntary, self-driven enrollment instead of having to convince and persuade somebody.
Yeah. And it sounds like, Martin, that there is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there is a certain framework or a pattern that you follow, and that you suggest that we follow when we have sales conversations. And I would love to explore that in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, Martin, let's talk about some of the key mistakes that you see when people have sales conversations. I know, Martin, that maybe we can spend 5 days here talking about mistakes.
Yeah.
But perhaps if you can just think about the key mistake, or maybe let's say the 3 key mistakes maximum that you normally see. What are they?
Well, the first mistake that people make is using the word but. Well, I'm not sure if we can afford this right now. But don't you see that the investment pays itself back? The moment you use the word but as a rebuttal or as a reply to an objection or a concern, you have made the other person wrong. And when you do that, nothing what comes after the word is going to resonate with them, click with them, or have any sort of meaningful contribution to the conversation. Never reply to an objection with the word but. A second mistake is not asking for the sale. So you're having this conversation. This person wants the outcome that you provide. They've engaged with you. They've paid you with their attention. You've built rapport. They've started trusting you. You've learned what life is like for them. And then to end the conversation on it's been great talking to you. I'll send you the proposal. Let me know what you think, is a waste of your time and a waste of their time. There are 11 different ways that you can ask somebody for the sale. From, do you want to move forward with this, to, let me know if this is the wrong idea. But it seems like getting this program for you would make a lot of difference. Do you agree? Right. So by leading with the right to veto and then asking for an agreement rather than a full sale, it's a completely different way to start. And you can think of so many different ways to ask for a sale where you don't have to push, you don't have to convince, you don't have to feel awkward about it. They've already given you so much. Would they be ready now to also give you money so that you can go and do the work for them? Why not simply ask what the best next step would be? Hey, where would you like to move from here? Where would you like to go from here? What do you think would be the best step for us to?
Yeah, definitely. And then the third mistake?
Third mistake? Selling to people who don't need or want what you have at this moment. A lot of sales practice, a lot of outreach, a lot of sales conversation should never even happen in the first place. You'll see that beautiful examples of that every day on LinkedIn. Somebody will send me a message saying, hey, we built a great process for generating a legal practice client. I didn't even read my bio. I don't run a legal practice. Why am I receiving this? But it's also with cold calls, where people think that because it's this type of business with that kind of size and that kind of revenue, they are a potential client. Well, no. If you would look a little further, you would, for example, in my case, when I reach out to a potential client, I want to go and see what these people's values are about, right? Because if I see that somebody is highly politicized and is very much into the entire political discourse, yeah, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with this person. It might be a wonderful client to work with. But I don't pay a lot of attention to politics. It's a big, messy, complicated thing that I don't understand too much about, so I don't follow politics so much. Somebody who is very much into politics spends a lot of their time in a different mind frame. And the chance that when you start talking to that person, you are sufficiently on the same level, on the same wavelength in terms of which things matter, which things are important, which values you have, even if you share the same political views and values. Because that person is very different in where they spend their time and what they talk about and what they post, you might, it's very possible, that this person and you just aren't going to hit it off so well. Now, should you go and talk to that person? Or should you go to somebody with an identical company, a very comparable company, who's not so much into politics, but who is talking about the same things that you talk about? Because then the moment they see your Twitter feed or your Facebook page or your Instagram, they're going to go, huh, they're just like me. And then you have this rapport before they even reply to your message. So consider very carefully where you spend your resources, whether it's cold calls or email campaigns or outreach or LinkedIn. Should you actually be talking to this person, or is there somebody who would be a better match for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks, Martin. So these are the key mistakes. Now,
no, these are just the first three that come to mind.
these are some of the mistakes.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. Now, as I said before, let's go back to the actual sales conversation. Now, for example, in my case, what I do, and I'm not an expert like you, but what I do, when I approach a sales conversation, I have a very clear pattern in mind. I know what I want to do, how I want to start, how I want to advance in different steps the conversation, how I want to close it, which doesn't mean that I have a memorized script, not at all. But the pattern and the framework is very clear. Just out of curiosity, do you follow a similar approach?
No, not in a structured way necessarily. I do have a couple of ground rules for sales conversation.
Okay.
So at the start, I like to signal that I'm here with an agenda and with a mission, and that, well, not that I'm in control, but that I'm the steward over this conversation. Right? Because one of the things that often derails a sales conversation is when you start by asking, hey, how are you doing? And the other person starts talking for 10 minutes about everything that's going on in their life. And then there's no real direction. And who is in the lead here? Who is guarding over the quality of this conversation? That's wrong. That you shouldn't let that happen. As the seller, you are a steward over the experience that the other person has. And that means you need to steward over the quality of the conversation. And so I start by saying, look, how have you been? Instead of how are you? Because then you frame things in a far more, instead of an amorphous, anything can fit into the definition, explanation of how are you doing, it's how have you been? Well, since yesterday, in the last week, been nice, been good, been doing this, it's all working well. All right, let's get started. Right? So that's one way that I like to start a conversation. The second is, well, I'm glad that you're here. Just for context, there's a couple of things I'd like to ask you about your goals and your challenges and your business. If we then feel that there's merit in working together, we can explore what that looks like, and otherwise I'll try to point you in the right direction. Does that sound fair? So I very clearly lay out, this is my agenda. It is included is whether or not we'll be working together, cards on the table. And there is, and then there's asking for permission. Is that fair? Right? Asking for a confirmation, and do they agree with my proposed structure of the call?
Yeah. And also, to me, sorry to cut you off here, Martin, but what you're doing there to me is that you are making it very clear to your prospect that it's a sales conversation. It's not a chit chat.
Of
Right?
course.
Yeah.
Of course. We both are busy people. Our time is worth money. We have a lot of things to do. I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time. This is why we're here. This is why I booked the call.
Yeah. And then what else? You say that there are maybe another ground rule, or maybe the key, if you have some key steps that you follow in the sales conversation.
Not so much key steps. I have the framework, the Leap Ethical Selling framework that I developed that guides me. But as for structure, there's only 3 things that I focus on really, as a kind of general guideline for how the conversation goes. That is, where are you at now? What is life like? What is business like? What are your goals in 3 months or 12 months, or, well, sometimes longer, but in general it's 3 or 12. And what needs to happen in that period to get to those goals? So what's the current, what's the goal, and what's the gap? What needs to happen in the gap? So that the conversation can center around whether or not Martin is the guy who should be helping you get those requirements met in the gap. And so it's really a free-flowing conversation based around a couple of strategic questions. And then the framework guides me, the LEAP framework, because that is really the whole background of how the entire interaction happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just so you know, I've got this framework in mind as well. For example, I'm a presentation coach. So for me, what's really important to understand is where that prospect is in terms of his or her ability to pitch and present and communicate their ideas. So the current situation, and then what they're trying to achieve, what the objective is, and what's in the way, if there is anything. What's getting in the way of them being able to present effectively. So exactly the same approach. Now, Marty, what you said is that what you do in that process is you basically ask questions. Right? You ask questions to understand that, like, present world, future, the gap. So can you tell us more about the importance of asking questions in a sales conversation and asking the right questions?
Well, let me preface that with a quick rundown of this framework, because you have 4 core areas. You have to listen, you have to explain, and you have to ask. So if you do that right, you make a profit. Listen, explain, ask, profit, leap. The LEAP framework works with 9 distinct areas of focus. First, you ask questions. You get answers, and then you have to explore what the meaning of those answers is. This is the listen stage. Because what we do is we ask questions, and then the moment somebody says, well, we have this problem, we go, oh, right, so they need my solution. Well, no, you don't know that. They have the problem, but you can't just conclude that means they need your solution. Until they tell you that and say, yes, I'll pay for it, that conclusion is not verified. It's not validated yet.
Or maybe, Martin, even worse, you ask questions and then you don't really listen to the answers. You immediately think about what you want to say, right?
That's not listening.
Yeah.
No, that is something. No, you when you listen, you have to actually properly pay attention. You have to read people. You have to see what they're saying. Ask yourself what it means, whether or not they are lacking trust. Because the whole goal of listening is not to identify patterns and draw conclusions, but earn permission. You want to have a conversation that is based on listening and matching the answers to what the meaning of those answers might be, in such a way that you become so highly interested in that other person that they become interested in you. Most selling happens where we try to make ourselves look really interesting and look at our accolades and all the clients that we've worked with and all the process we have in place and our intellectual property. My God, it's so much. We're so interesting. Nobody cares. They only care about a solution. And they only want that solution from somebody that they are interested in. You want to be interesting to other people, be interested in them. It's a very automatic thing. And when you do that and you start to learn this person, they start to open up, they start to share more, they start to give profounder answers or more detail. And when that happens, it means that you're earning permission. You earn that permission because you need it in order to move into the explaining, which means what's in the tin, what's the mechanics. And there you explain what something is. Obviously, you have to explain, but also what it is not, and who it is for or not for. So those in explain are the 3 core areas of attention. Like, yes, I'm trying to show you that it, the car goes this fast and has that many seatbelts and is this fuel efficient. But if you're looking for something that also makes you look, I don't know, like the hottest guy in town, well, this is not the car you're looking for. This is a family car. So if that is what you want, then you should veto. You should say, no, that's not for me. Let's look at a different model. And the same thing with is for and is not for. Not everybody should buy your thing at this moment. The fact that they have the problem, that you can solve it for them, doesn't necessarily mean that they should buy it right now. That depends on many things that you discover as you have this conversation. And so when you explain in a way where you open doors for people to walk away, where you give them the right to veto, they automatically feel more trusting. They feel safer because I'm not being persuaded to do anything. I'm not being pushed into an opinion. I'm not being convinced. No, I'm being shown that very clearly this is what it is not. And here's the door if it's not for you. Wow, that's nice, actually. That's not how sales normally happens. This builds trust. You need that in order to move into the enrollment phase, asking for the sale, which you do by leading with no. No is not a word to strike up until you get your 100 no's so that you can get your one yes. No, no is something to work with, to utilize, to not just give people the right to veto, but to actually suggest at times that people say no. When you do that in the right way, that trust becomes so big that they start to be curious about your vision. They start to shift their vision to match and overlap your vision. Their vision to match and overlap yours.
Martin, sorry, this is very interesting. Again, sorry to cut you off, but when you mention something which is super interesting, I just want to go a bit deeper. So, can you tell us a little bit more about these? You've just mentioned something around no. No is not something that we need to avoid. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about it? Can you give us an example?
An example. Well, let's start with the way human relationships stay healthy, right? If you've ever seen a parent and their child, or two partners in a relationship, where somebody is saying, no, this has to happen, you have to do it, I expect this of you. And then the other person is being held to a task or responsibility that they didn't necessarily agree to. And this happens a lot in relationships, that we remove another person's autonomy because we think that we know better. We think we know what is right for them, what they should do. Now, just shut up, Mr. Buyer, and buy this thing because this is going to solve your problem. Haven't you told me that you have this problem? People don't talk like that. But the attitude that shows up very often is much too close to that. That, well, the buyer is wrong because they're not buying my thing. Now, in this attitude, in this making the other person wrong, you are trying to tell people what they should be doing. And even if that's on a very subtle level, the subconscious reacts and rejects it because I am an autonomous being. I'm in control. I make the decisions here. This is my life. This is my business. And nobody can tell me that I should make a decision or make a different decision or do this thing or not do that thing. Removing autonomy, a prison sentence is one of the worst things that you can do to somebody. Taking somebody's liberty away. And on a business level, where it comes to the sales conversation, that liberty also extends to the choices that you make. And so very often we inadvertently signal an authority that is not ours to have, because this is not our world. This is the other person's world. They get to choose. You lead the conversation and you're in control of the buyer process, and it's all very nice. But ultimately the decision to buy, that's the other person's decision. And so by leading with no and using a phrase like, for example, tell me if this is the wrong idea, and then I'll get out of your hair, but I think we could, You give people the right to veto. You hand them their autonomy. You tell them, you tell me whether this is a yes or a no. You tell me if this is a no. And it takes away that pressure that, buyers very often also feel anxious because, oh, I need this thing and I would like to, and I don't know if I trust this person, and I don't know if it's the right thing for me, and oh my God, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I wish it wouldn't be so awkward, right? So it's not just the seller who has to struggle and find a way to make it natural. The buyer also wants it to be a natural experience. And by being very, very outspoken and open, by leading with no, inviting a no, giving people the right to veto, giving them their autonomy, you take all this awkwardness away. And it becomes a normal human conversation about a problem that maybe should get solved now or not. Let me help you figure it out.
That's great. Leading with no, great concept. And because we are talking about no, that brings me to another question, Martin, which is objections. Now, often when you have a sales conversation, sometimes it happens that there are no objections at all and they say yes, but often there are some either objections or questions, concerns. Do you have any, how do you go about handling objections? Do you have any tips or techniques or whatever comes to your mind when we talk about handling objections in a sales conversation?
Well, I don't have a specific structure or method for it. Like for this objection, you should react in that way. The first thing that I always want to know is what are they really objecting against, right? If they give me this reason, whether it's money or I have to talk to my business partner or it wouldn't work for us, what actually is the real reason they're objecting? Because in a lot of cases, people throw up a smokescreen, especially when you have invested your time, you have given your best ideas, you have maybe the second conversation or the third conversation, and they're appreciative because you are helping them get clarity and you're helping them figure something out, and they feel that you're on their side. And now I have to tell you no, that's going to, right? So people, even though they want to say no, they'll very often, or maybe they want to say yes, but there's a concern. They'll say no, they'll raise an objection just so that they don't have to say no, right? So the question always, the first question is, why are they objecting? What are they objecting against? And then the next thing is, whatever the objection is to turn that into a point of conversation, right? What I learned from my coach years ago is that the money conversation, the sales conversation, is part of the coaching process. Right? Before a buyer ends up hiring me as a coach, there's already been coaching going on. I've been coaching them on whether or not to make this decision with me. And even if you're not a coach, maybe you're a designer or a consultant, or it doesn't matter what you do, you having the conversation with the buyer means that you are serving them in making a decision, which essentially means that you're coaching them on making a decision. And whatever objection happens, well, if they give you permission for it, remember, ethical selling is all about permission, then you can coach them on why this is an objection and whether or not there's a solution to it. So then the objection itself becomes a jumping off point for another act of service, which, by the way, is how I see selling itself, as an act of service or an act of devotion. Yeah. Because you're devoted to your business and to the results that you get your people, and so you commit to this, you're devoted to this. Yeah. That kind of, it's a mix of business think and my spiritual background.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking about. And again, with objections, one of the, you mentioned it briefly, but one of the objections that we hear sometimes is it's too expensive, or I don't know, I don't have the budget. Okay, great. So because my question was, how do you go about handling that particular objection? It's too expensive.
Too expensive
compared to what?
Yeah, to the iPhone case that you just bought yesterday, or compared to the cost of sitting with the problem that you've had for the last 2 years and not solving it. It depends on how this person sees this particular amount of money and in relation to what. Again, this is a wonderful thing to have to have a coaching conversation about. Really, what do they compare it to? Then the second thing is, I don't have the budget. Yeah, well, you'd be surprised how much budget can be freed up if you ask the right questions. Very often, you'll see somebody say, well, I don't have the budget, and the next day people don't buy cruises at the moment, I don't think, but you'll see them buy a gaming console or invest in a new website, or who knows. No budget means I've not prioritized this solution yet. And if they have prioritized this solution, and you know that you can solve the problem for them, and they still tell you no budget, it means you have not shown them the value that the solution can have for them, which puts the onus back on you.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that they object and say, I don't have a budget, that's not their problem, that's your problem. And you can work on that problem by having a further conversation about what actually the value of it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Martin, also another thing that I find very interesting about what you say, you've just said that ethical selling is all about getting permission or something along those lines. I would
Earning
love,
permission,
yeah, earning permission. I would love to explore that with you. So can you tell us more about this idea of earning permission and how do you actually do that?
Well, compare a doctor to a policeman, right? Policeman is the only kind of person who gets to ask you questions without your permission. That's just the role, that's the dynamics you're in. If you're in a doctor's office and he starts to ask you questions, you have given the doctor permission, otherwise you wouldn't be there. And if the doctor starts asking questions that aren't related to your case, you might revoke that permission and say, well, actually, I don't know what you're smoking, but I'm not staying here. I'm not interested in what remedy you might have. So permission is something that you want to seek, because how are you going to make a suggestion to somebody who hasn't given you permission? Hey, look, I'm seeing that you're holding the tool this way. Let me show you. Who asked you? Meaning you don't have permission. Right? Look, that business problem that you have, I can totally solve that. Let me show you. I didn't ask you. I didn't give you permission to go and pitch me on something. All right, so we've had this conversation. You totally see the value and the price is not a problem. I think you should totally get it. Who gave you permission to tell me what to do? Right? In all the selling that we know so well, people are being slammed with dominance and permissionless suggestions and recommendations, and it's so often a way of making the other person feel bullied, being bossed around. Now, when you change that around and you make everything about gaining permission, hey, let me ask you a couple of questions. Okay, good, here's permission. That's an interesting thing you said there. Do you mind if I dig down on that a little bit? Because I'd like to unpack and see what's behind that. Okay, you get permission. If you would not state that, but tell me what that means, then you might actually be threatening on a subconscious level, without you wanting to, the other person, because suddenly you're poking at something that might be complex, might be something they don't normally talk about, or that they haven't figured out for themselves. Any kind of a reason. It can be something that they rather you don't talk about, ask about. If, however, you ask permission and they have developed enough trust to open up to you, then you get that permission, and then you can explore the topic as much as you want. And the same thing with asking for the sale. Same thing with explaining what's in the tin. This is where a lot of normal sales approaches go completely wrong. We're with company so-and-so, and we do this and this thing, and let me show you how it works. I didn't give you permission. I don't even care how it works. I don't even know who you are. Whereas if you ask for permission to say, well, if you have this problem, and we've talked about that for a moment, and I think we have a solution. Do you want me to show you how that would work? And they go, yeah, sure, show me. Then you have permission, and they're going to be much more receptive. Yeah. Asking for the sale, same thing. if you force that, if you get too close, if you're too fast, and you start asking them for a sale or having the money conversation before they have explicitly or implicitly given you the signal and the permission that it's okay to go there, you're only making it more difficult for yourself.
Yeah, super powerful. And it goes back to asking questions. So the way you earn permission is through the sales conversation.
Of course.
You need to ask the right questions to get the permission to advance the conversation to where you want it to go. Absolutely.
Every question is an audition for the next.
Yeah. And last week I was looking at your content, Martin, and there was one piece of content which I found very interesting. I have it here. You say that your job as a salesperson is to protect the buying process. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, it's the same thing as with that the opening question, right? There's a person who has a need. The need is so big and painful that they're actually engaging with somebody who sells stuff. That means that there's a big thing going on in their life. You know, if we're talking about a $50 template for a website, no, that's not the same kind of level. But then you probably wouldn't be having sales conversations with that person looking to buy one. But if you're talking about something more involved and more expensive, yeah, it's got to be a significantly painful, difficult, challenging, costly problem for them to want to engage with somebody who's selling a solution. That means that they are in a delicate kind of situation, state, phase where there's something wrong. I need a solution. I might have the money for it, depending on who it is. And I don't know if I should go with this one or that one or that one. That's an awkward position to be in. I don't like to be in that position. When I need to go and find a website developer, that really sucks, right? Because there are so many options, and how do I not get burned? And with whom do I get the best results? And how it's going to be faster? And so many things to work about. I don't want to be in that situation. When I am in that situation, then the moment I start talking to a website developer, he'd better have a structure in place and a framework and an attitude and a way of dealing with me where it becomes less difficult for me to even have this conversation, where it becomes a situation where I feel I'm being taken care of, where somebody is looking out for what would be the best result for me. Am I getting off the topic?
Oh, no, that's great. And another thing also I wanted to ask you, Martin, is that I've heard you say that there are 3 kinds of yes. And actually only one is the yes you want to hear, which is, okay, let's work together. Again, what are these 3 types of yes?
Well, there's confirmation, there is counterfeit, and there's commitment. Counterfeit yes is what I mentioned before. When somebody isn't clear yet about what they really actually want, or whether or not they should, and they give you a blow-off answer. That's a counterfeit yes. Yeah, it sounds good. Then, or when they don't want to hurt your feelings, or whether they're uncomfortable, or they need to talk to somebody first, but they can't admit that to you yet because they don't trust you enough yet. Or counterfeit yes sounds like yes, means something completely different. The commitment, the confirmation yes, is very often taken as if that means that the sale is going to happen. And where things go wrong is when we then instantly go and bring out the PayPal link, or we send, let me send you the invoice and let's get started. If I give you a confirmation yes, which means, yeah, I'm buying in. Yeah, my vision is getting there. Yeah, I feel good about making a decision here about this. And you respond to me by saying, right, nice, let's do this. That's a threat. That is a signal that something might be wrong. You have to remember, the subconscious is always looking out for danger, right? The fight, the lizard brain is always asking itself for anything that happens in the world 3 questions. When something new happens, will this eat me? If not, can I eat it? And if not, can I mate with it? That is the evolutionary imperative. That is how society, that is how a human being survives, and any animal survives this way, by keeping us safe from harm and moving us towards well-being. And it's highly paranoid. The moment something seems like a threat, even though you don't mean anything threatening at all, the subconscious will say, that's a threat, careful. And things will shut down. People will recoil, they will withdraw, they will give more blow-off answers, counterfeit yeses. So you want to be very careful to not inadvertently trigger these warning bells. I lost my track again.
No, you haven't. It's the
No?
3 types of yes, and
Right.
it's clear.
So when you go and you cheer, and you're, it's a yes, let's go forward and let's do this. Like I had this client once, and we had this conversation. It was all very nice and really good rapport. And he goes, yeah, I like it. It's a sale. I go, no, John, it's a sale when the money is there. Now, this was somebody I knew quite well and has a really good sense of humor. So I knew I could get away with being cheeky that way. And he understands sales himself. So I wasn't out of place in that situation. But until the contract is signed or the money is there, it is not a sale. And so when somebody gives you a yes that is not a counterfeit yes, but it's also not a commitment yes, one thing that you can do is challenge the yes. Hey, really great that you are so on board and that you see the merit of all of this. Before we move forward with all of this, let's have a look and review everything that's going to go in it, because I want to I only want people who are 100% happy to do the work with me. And if there's any concerns or anything that you're uncertain about, let's have a look at them and see if we need to address that. So then I ask permission to ask more questions so that we can look at any of the objections that might be there that we can address. And then that person feels heard, understood. They feel taken care of. They feel that there is somebody on the other side of the table who isn't just, actually, it feels like there's somebody on your side of the table. As David Newman, was it? No. Ian Altman, same side selling. Somebody who's on your side of the table instead of opposite of you. I think that's a really nice
metaphor, yeah.
Yeah. And that is a feeling that you want to give people, like, hey, I'm not being pushed into anything. I'm being helped. How wonderful. Yeah. And if that then is in the context of clearly about whether or not to work together, this is, after all, a sales conversation, then you're being so transparent and open that you don't have to worry about the other person feeling threatened. Unless, of course, you take a confirmation yes and you consider it a commitment yes and you let that shine through. You question the yes, and it's only when it's a commitment yes that you know, yeah, they've actually made the decision. So don't jump to conclusions, because we're programmed to draw conclusions based on what happens. That's confirmation bias and perception bias. We're always wanting to see that what we think is actually what is happening there. That we have it right, that, yes, this means that. No, it doesn't always. And yes doesn't always mean, yes, money is on its way.
I've seen it, like, personally. I have received yes responses in the past, and to me it was a yes. I thought that person had become a client. Actually, in reality, I've never worked with that person, so it happened a couple of times. So
it will happen. And knowing the difference between the 3 kinds of yes also makes it very much easier to deal with follow-up. So in your database, your CRM, or wherever you keep your records, there is James, and James said yes, and you agreed that you would send the invoice, and he didn't pay it, and you sent a quick follow-up email a few days later, and he didn't reply to that, and now you don't know what to do, where to go. But if your point of view is that, well, he gave me a confirmation, he gave me a commitment, and now he backed away from that, something went wrong, then you put yourself in an awkward situation. When you get a yes that seems like a commitment, and then it turns out they're not doing it, then that yes wasn't a commitment, that was confirmation. Now you have a reason to connect with that person again and figure out which objections are in the way. What would be required from you in terms of messaging or promise or outcome or package in order for the confirmation yes to become a commitment yes.
Yeah. And in general, Martin, how do you go about following up with prospects? Do you have, again, any advice there?
Yes, follow up with prospects.
just do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get all kinds of uncomfortable about it. And in the end, these are people who have a problem that you might be able to solve. They've engaged with you, and now things have stalled. Now things are stuck, which means that for them as well as for you, there is an open file, there's an open case. And that, for you, it weighs a lot heavier than it does for a potential buyer. Right? There's one, maybe two providers or sellers that they've talked to, and they're not decided yet that they're going to go with this buyer or seller, this provider or seller. Okay, it's not a big deal, but it's still an open case. It's an open loop in their mind. So to go back and to see if you can get closure with a yes or a no, actually isn't only in your favor, it's also in their favor. It's one less thing for them to think about. And very often you'll find that people stopped responding or didn't follow through on their yes simply because stuff happened, because life got in the way, because a pandemic happened, because somebody fell ill, because an employee started causing trouble or had to leave, or there are so many things that go on in another person's world. You have no idea how many reasons there can be for them not getting back to you. Now, each of those reasons can be valid or invalid, can be a reason to say no, or to say, let's have another conversation with you. But you're not going to have that conversation unless you get in front of that person again and say, hey, we had this thing going on. I guess stuff must have happened, so I understand. It's still an open case. Should we have a conversation about where to go from here? Right? That gives them the invitation to say yes or no. Again, you give them the right to veto. But you're also showing that you're serious, you're a professional, you actually want to take care of the process that they're going through with you. And that, the whole feeling of feeling like there's somebody who actually cares is so important in the whole process.
Yeah.
And follow-up is a way to indicate that, hey, I haven't forgotten you.
Yeah, and as you say, absolutely. Then the objective is for both of us to really understand, okay, is it a yes or is it a no? It could be a no, but at least both parties know and can close that case. Yeah. Okay. There's one more thing for sure that I wanted to ask you, Martin, which is this. Again, another thing that I've heard you say is you talk about this idea of, which is definitely connected to the sales process, but it's not necessarily part of the sales conversation itself, or maybe in part, yes, but the idea of how do you price your work, which is basically the idea of, which is super useful in business. Do you sell time for money? Do you offer time for money? Or do you sell a result, an outcome? Can you tell us more about this?
How many people do you know who go looking for a service provider and say, I really need to find a branding consultant and buy 5 hours from him? Don't know who, but I need to go and buy 5 hours of branding consulting.
I need these 5 hours.
Nobody does that.
Yeah.
If you go and talk to a lawyer because of your divorce, you're not going to say, hey, listen, can I get 10 hours of help from you with a brain surgeon? It takes as long as it takes. What people buy is an outcome, is a change, is a transformation. And your pricing, sure, it can have a relation to the amount of time it takes. But there's a lot of pitfalls when you use time as the basis for your pricing. The first is that it's very easy to start downplaying the effect that you have on people, the outcome. So yeah, it only takes me 2 hours. So yeah, of course, it only takes me 10 hours. Sure, they get all this result, but if I can do it in 10 hours, how can I possibly charge that much money for it? So you start to negotiate with yourself and lowering your rates in your own mind because of the amount of time that it takes. But if you can do something in only 2 hours or 10 hours, that's because you've already spent 10 or 20 or 30 years getting so good that you can get this result in only this much time. It's the Picasso example. I don't know if it's an actual event, but they say that he was sat at a terrace, doodling away, and a lady with a poodle came by and said, "Oh, Mr. Picasso, can you draw my poodle?" And he made a very quick drawing, and he said, "That's 25,000 francs, or whatever much." And he said, 25,000? How can it be so much? It only took you 5 minutes. And he goes, "No, it took me 25 years. Right? So the
amazing, great story.
Yeah, but it's really true. It's the same story that is behind it only took me 30 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
But you've already paid the cost. So the fact that you can now do it very fast, that doesn't mean that the work or the outcome isn't worth good money. The second problem with hourly rates or hourly pricing is that we tend to forget how much it actually costs to be able to deliver 1 hour. Right? At the end of the year, you might be able to spend X amount of hours doing the actual work, but that's only a percentage of all your available work hours. Then there's generating business. Then there's your website update, producing content, hiring staff, bookkeeping, legal, supply chain, manufacturing, you name it. There is 100 different things, 1,000 different things that all cost money that you cannot put on an invoice. Now, who's going to pay for that? You? Well, that's the road to bankruptcy. Right? Unless you factor all of that into your effective hourly rate, you're charging too little. And as a rule of thumb, for most all consultants and service types, you're probably charging too little. I don't know you, I have not met you. But I will wager money that if you show up in my inbox and you say, "Well, I charge this for that kind of project," I'll have a look at your website, I'll see the kind of quality that I think you would be able to deliver and the kind of outcome. Very likely it's going to be, you're charging too little.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense. It's such an obvious thing to do, but I think we are both surprised if we look at how most people go about pricing their work. There are a lot of people and professionals, consultants, coaches who still do that, which is interesting. But anyway, Martin, it's been great chatting with you. I've learned so much. Before we close, just one more question. I think you mentioned, I don't know whether it was a book before, but do you have any, for those who want to learn more about either ethical selling or selling in general, do you have a book or two that you would like to recommend for our listeners?
You mean for myself or a resource?
I don't know whether you've got a book yourself or a general book that you think this is...
Well, there is a PDF on my site, 10 Rules for Ethical Selling, at martinsteller.com. That's a nice little introduction to this way of thinking. If you want something from what actually might be really useful for people is Chris Voss.
The
former
FBI guy.
negotiator, yes. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's about negotiation. Similar to that is Jim Camp, Start with No. It's also a really, really good book. You'll see then where I got the lead with no concept.
Yeah.
And there is Oren Klaff, Klaff.
Pitch Anything.
Pitch Anything.
Yeah.
These, if you want to get, upgrade at the highest possible level your ability to have conversations that get you moving forward with people, these 3 books are really, really powerful.
Great. Thank you, Martin. And you see, that's why I wanted to have a conversation with you for 2 main reasons. One was because of the ethical side of what you propose, which is very much aligned with the way we work as well. And the other thing is because in the end, what we are talking about here is communicating effectively. You teach people how to communicate effectively in a sales conversation. That's the way I say it from an outside perspective. We work with people who want to be able to communicate effectively through presentations. But
it's the same thing.
Same thing. And that's why, for example, Pitch Anything is one of the books that I would also recommend if somebody wants to improve their general presentation skills.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Martin, thank you very much. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that this has been useful for our listeners as well. And you are in Spain, aren't you?
I'm in Spain, yes.
Yeah, so it's not going to be easy to meet each other, but it's
Not at the
great.
moment.
Yeah, not at the moment, but let's keep in touch. All the very best, and thank you very much again for your time and for sharing your insights with us.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin. All the best.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.